a lot of people would argue that APS-C is dead, and a different lot of people would argue that it really isn't. Same goes for Super 35. They're basically the same size, but I have my own issues with Super 35 or APS-C from somebody who uses them all the time. This FX30 is an APS-C size sensor, and I'm right now shooting on the A7 IV, which is a full frame sensor. And there it lies the problem. I don't have an issue with APS-C or Super 35 or even Micro Four Thirds as a sensor size. But the problem is when you're interchanging full frame and APS-C and you're trying to do them all at once. So the biggest difference between APS-C and full frame, they're going to be the examples that I use in this because it makes the most sense. Full frame is a larger sensor, so a 50mm lens will look like a 50mm does on a full frame, but a 50mm lens on an APS-C sensor, which is smaller, is going to look more cropped in because you're taking a smaller portion of that image circle coming through the lens. So there's a few downsides to having that smaller field of view. The most common one that people would talk about is the depth of field. If you have a smaller field of view and the same lens, you need to either zoom out or back up the camera further, which is going to increase your depth of field. So you're going to get a less blurry background, blurry foreground, etc. Now, a lot of people seem to have a problem with that. I don't really care that much about depth of field specifically, but it is a common issue that people like to complain about. What I find a little bit more annoying is the fact that you have to use different focal lengths to get the tightness of shot that you want. For example, this 24 to 70mm lens on my full frame A7 IV will be a 24 to 70, but on the FX30 here, it's more like a 36 to 105. That focal range is great, but if I want it to be wider, I need to then go down in my focal length. I need to get a wider lens, which I don't actually have. So I can go all the way down to a 24mm full frame equivalent on my full frame camera, but on my APS-C camera, I can only go down to a 36-ish millimeter full frame equivalent. So if I wanted to get a really wide shot, it's a lot easier to do on a larger sensor. Now, generally with APS-C lenses, it is easier to make them wider than it is for a full frame. Like you see more like 12 and 10 mil APS-C lenses than you do full frame ones. Or if they are full frame, they're just massive. So that's sort of the case there. But me personally, I don't own any APS-C or Super 35 lenses. All of my lenses cover full frame because I don't want to have to deal with only having lenses that can only really work on one camera without crazy vignetting on the other one. And kind of linked to that FOV again, telephoto lenses are often too tight on smaller sensors because, again, that FOV is smaller, so this 70 to 200 on the APS-C camera here will act more like it's a 105 to 300. Now, when I'm talking about these equivalents, I'm talking about full frame equivalents. The focal length itself doesn't actually change. It's just what it would look like on a full frame field of view wise, not depth of field wise. There's a difference. But I had a shoot recently where I was using the 7200 G Master Mark II on the FX30, and sometimes it was just a bit too tight, which is kind of annoying. I had to back up further than I would like to. Whereas with a full frame, I would have a true 70mm look on full frame, which maybe wouldn't have been too tight. However, with that being said, on a smaller sensor with higher focal lengths, because it basically punches into an equivalent of a higher focal length, you can get more reach if that's what you're after. So if you are trying to shoot things that are really far away and only really far away, then maybe having your 7200 act more like a 105 to 300 might be a good thing. Not all the time though, that's kind of the problem. But when it comes to my biggest issue with APS-C versus full frame, it's using them both at the same time, or at least switching between them. I know what 70mm looks like on full frame, but I also have to know what it looks like on APS-C. So if I want to take one lens off one camera and put it on the other one, I then have to adjust the distance or the framing to accommodate for that. This is especially true with prime lenses like the one I'm shooting on now. This is the 40mm Nisi Athena, and this is what it looks like on full frame. It's like 1.2 meters in front of me, whereas on this one, I would have to put the camera way further back just to have this same framing, and even then it would look a little bit different because the distance to subject would change the compression and all that sort of stuff. And sort of as a like side note with this, my problem with the A7 IV is the APS-C crop that is forced when you shoot 50 FPS or higher in 4K. This was a really contentious point. A lot of people complained about it when the A7 IV first came out, is that 4K 50 or 4K 60 crop, meaning you can't shoot full frame 4K 50 or 60, which, you know, if it was just an APS-C camera, that's fine. The FX30 can do that. There's no crop between the 25 or 50p or 30 and 60, so it looks the same. The problem is when in one camera, if you switch modes and then it crops in a significant amount, if you're using one particular lens, then that lens is going to act different depending on which mode you're in. Just before I got the FX30 actually, I did a shoot on the A7 IV where I was doing photos, videos, and those videos were slow-mo and non-slow-mo. So I was switching back and forth between photos, slow motion, and regular video. So anytime I went into that 4K 50, it would crop in a bunch. And then being on the 7200, it's like, okay, well now it's 105 to 300. And it's just another thing to deal with that I'd rather not deal with. So I'd rather have all of my cameras be the same size sensor if I'm using them together. And I would also like to be able to shoot at least 50p without having to crop in on the sensor. Don't get me wrong, I think the option to crop in on the sensor is amazing. All cameras that are a high enough resolution should do this. The A7 IV is great for that. In 4K 25, 24, or 30, you can crop into APS-C mode to get that extra reach or to get that different framing if you need. But it should be an option. It shouldn't force you into it. And I get why it forces you into it when you shoot 4K 50, but I don't like it. Anyway, that's my rant for this week, I guess. Go check out my last video, maybe about this FX30 top handle extension. It's a great little addition. And do the other things. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye. Nailed.